Tonight, record crossings, the highest monthly border arrests in 20 years.
The numbers are staggering.
And Eastern offensive. Ukrainian forces put up a fierce fight against Russian invaders in eastern Ukraine.
Plus, bad blood. Hungary's tepid response to the war in Ukraine.
We've tried to, in some ways, thread a bit of a middle road.
And we say goodbye to a beloved member of the CBN family.
I have seen more than I ever dreamed I would see.
Remembering Dede Robertson. All this and more, next on Faith Nation. Crisis at the southern border. Is it about to get even worse? Welcome to Faith Nation in Washington. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening, I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, a staggering new record. The number of people crossing into the U.S. illegally now at its highest in 2 decades. More than 222,000 migrants arrested at the border in March, and those numbers only expected to soar higher. And with President Biden announcing plans to lift Title 42, a Trump-era COVID borders restriction that limits migration during a public health emergency, those numbers are expected to climb. CBN's Tara Mergener has the latest on what's happening and the mounting pushback. Tara.
Well, John and Jenna, so far in 2022, nearly 2 million illegal border crossings, and we're only 4 months in. Reports are at least 300,000 people have evaded Border Patrol agents this year as they are busy tending to migrant families, unaccompanied children, and a soaring number of single men. Now, 26 governors are coming together hoping to bolster security. The effort is part of an expansion of the Arizona Border Strike Force, which has seized thousands of pounds of illicit drugs since it began in 2015.
The majority of the nation's governors are joining together to share information, to bring law enforcement assets, to use intelligence in our fusion centers so that we can stop this flow of dangerous drugs like fentanyl, which is the #1 cause of death here in southern Arizona among young people.
This as record numbers of migrants stream into the U.S. around the clock. With detention facilities overflowing, American taxpayers are footing the bill to drive or fly migrants deeper into the U.S.
What that does is incentivizes people to send their relatives to call back home and send for more people. And that's the situation we're in now, the worst surge in the history of that southwest border.
Depending on whether President Biden ends Title 42, there's fear numbers that have been climbing since he took office will balloon to levels never seen before in the U.S. Since 2020, the feds say it's kept 2 million migrants in Mexico while they await a court date.
35% support Biden rolling back those border controls. 54% oppose it.
While Republicans blast the idea of lifting Title 42.
These guys want to make it worse and release essentially everybody who comes.
Some Democrats concerned about political fallout are pressuring Biden to reconsider.
Not the right way of handling the border situation.
They add he's announced no plan for the new tsunami of illegal entries that would follow. This year alone, agents have caught at least 23 people on the terror watch list.
It's something that Americans don't think, that we should have an open borders policy. And that is the policy of the Biden administration, and all they do is make it more wide open.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott is taking the state's immigration fight to Washington, D.C. by sending busloads of asylum seekers directly there.
Joe Biden has refused to come to the border to see the chaos that he has created by his open border policies, so we're going to take the border to him.
And rather than deal with an immigration process that can take years, thousands of Russians and Ukrainians fleeing war are also entering the U.S. via the southern border now, traveling to Mexico and then sneaking across with the help of smugglers. John and Jenna.
And here with us now is Doris Meisner, head of the U.S. Immigration Policy Program at the Migration Policy Institute. Doris, welcome. The record number of migrant crossings comes as a public health order enabling United States officials to turn back most migrants is set to expire, even those seeking asylum. Doris, if that order put in place under Trump and enforced by the Biden administration is lifted, could we see an even worse humanitarian crisis at the border?
I think it's definitely the case that whenever Title 42 is lifted, there will be a surge. But it also will abate when regular enforcement is put back into effect and it becomes clear to migrants that are intending to come, as well as to their smugglers, most importantly, that they will be returned unless they have valid claims for protection in the United States.
In the month of March, I think there was something 220,000 illegal crossings, the highest in, I think, 20 years. Doris, your thoughts on that and if it's sustainable for the United States?
Well, of course, those crossings are not all equal to people. They're crossings, and many of them are repeat crossings because of Title 42, which expels people without any consequences. And so it's a large number. It's historically large, but it's also the case that Title 42 has created these artificial circumstances whereby people are crossing repeatedly, particularly when they're Mexicans, and going back and forth because there aren't other enforcement measures in place. When Title 42 is lifted, whenever it's lifted, there will likely be an effort for people to get here, but as soon as enforcement before judges, asylum decisions being made more timely, and repeat crossings are no longer able to be easily done, that should start to change the structure of incentives.
Doris, in the few seconds we have left, I'd love for you to weigh in. Texas sending migrants by bus to Washington, D.C. to highlight the issue of immigration. Do you believe that this is a setup for a compromise between Republicans and Democrats?
I don't think it's a setup for compromise. I find it quite inexplicable because people have to volunteer to take the buses, otherwise it would be kidnapping. And they are therefore getting a free ride paid for by the state of Texas, whereas otherwise they would pay their own transportation to go to destinations in order to wait for their immigration proceedings. So it does seem to me like it's real showcasing.
All right, Doris Meisner with the Migration Policy Institute. Doris, thank you.
Thanks, Doris.
Thank you.
And turning now to Ukraine, the White House is planning to send more weapons to the war-torn country. The aid could be similar to the $800 million package announced last week. So far, the U.S. and other countries have given Ukraine 70,000 anti-tank weapons and 30,000 shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. Meanwhile, officials believe the Russians will target roads in western Ukraine being used to ship weapons farther into the country. This as Russia has already stepped up attacks in the country's eastern industrial area. And joining us now from Ukraine, CBN News senior international correspondent George Thomas. George, great to see you as always. You're in Zaporizhia, on Ukraine's eastern front. Tell us what you're seeing and what you're hearing there as Russian forces mount their assault in the east.
Yeah, so almost more than 24 hours after Ukraine's President Zelensky announced that the Russians had begun their offensive in the east, I decided to take a road trip from Kyiv down to Zaporizhia to the area that is about an hour from Mariupol, about 25 minutes from Russian forces. In fact, my friend who was driving me to Zaporizhia today, he got a call in the middle of the drive saying that his son, who is was 25 miles from here, got killed today in action as his battalion pushed Russian forces further back. They killed about 80 Russians. But in return, the Ukrainians lost 11 of their men. One of them being my friend's son. But this is the reality, and all eyes today is on the eastern part of Ukraine, where the Russians are mounting an offensive, hopefully to take the regions of Donbass and Luhansk.
Hitting so close to home, George. I know you were in Bucha and Irpin and met with survivors of Russia's occupation. How are Ukrainians holding up, and are they starting to feel demoralized, or has their resolve at all strengthened given what you just mentioned, the driver's son with you, also a casualty now of war?
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're not depressed. They're not, they're not sad. They're not despondent. They are just the opposite. The very fact that these two major cities, Bucha and very close to the Ukrainian capital, they managed to beat the Russians back, is absolutely stunning. Yes, there were horrific events that took place in Bucha. I interviewed one pastor who had about 167 people in his church basement, and they were surrounded by Russians, and he managed to calm one of the key commanders of this force that came into the church, and for 3-4 days they were surrounded by them. Fortunately, nothing happened to those who were hiding in the church basement. But later on, in fact, just a few days ago, the head of Ukrainian intelligence came to the church pastor and said, "You are very lucky because the man who was in charge of this particular battalion has been accused of rape and murder in Bucha, and so they're very, very lucky." But people are cleaning up, guys. I mean, there were folks, the tractors were out, the bulldozers were out, people were starting to put up their new windows. So it's incredible, a sign of resilience.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and it sounds like divine intervention in the case of that church and those people. George, what's the reality for Ukraine the longer that this war wears on? Is there any concern of stalling international support both morally and militarily?
No, absolutely. Again, just the opposite. The Biden administration has talked about sending in hundreds of millions of dollars worth of military hardware. Germany, for the first time, has also indicated that they're going to ship various heavy military equipment. They've not said specifically what, but it's a game changer, guys. It really is, because they know the battle for the East has already started, and all indications is that all of this equipment has already come to those very strategic areas in the East. That's going to be monumental for the Ukrainians in the fight against the Russians.
George Thomas in Zaporizhia, Ukraine. Stay safe. Thank you so much, George.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Coming up, in good conscience, why a possible Biden administration move to pull back on a Trump-era rule is prompting swift backlash among healthcare workers.
And welcome back. Potential changes in healthcare. The Biden administration is preparing to rescind a Trump-era conscience rule involving abortion. That rule intended to make it easier for doctors and nurses to decline performing abortions or other medical procedures on religious grounds, but it never went into effect because it got tied up in federal court since 2019. According to Politico, the Department of Health and Human Services plans to propose pulling the rule altogether by the end of this month. Well, joining us now is CBN News chief political analyst David Brody. David, the timing of this decision is interesting. If the White House lifts Trump's conscience rule, it would come just months before the Supreme Court renders a decision that could overturn Roe v. Wade. David, could that be a motivation here?
Well, sure. Oh, wait, let me think. Politics and motivation? Yeah, absolutely. And look, this is what liberals are hoping for, right? I mean, they know they're going to, at this point, get creamed in the midterms. They're trying to figure out a way to kind of get around that. They hope that there'll be some momentum at the Supreme Court with the Dobbs v. Jackson situation as it relates to that ruling coming in June. And then, of course, if you throw this in as well, you get the pro-choice crowd potentially excited about that news as well. So, yeah, there's a political ramification to it. But having said that, this is part and parcel of what we've seen from the Biden administration. It's full-on progressive policies. They have done no center-left agenda at all. And this is just part of what we've seen ever since the Biden administration took over in 2021.
David, the Biden administration set to erase student loan debt for more than 40,000 borrowers. Your thoughts on that, and is the Biden administration caving to progressive pressure here?
Well, I mean, I guess to a degree. But look, if you look at polling on this issue, and it's driven a lot by the Gen Zs and to a degree the millennials, I don't want to call it a winning issue necessarily for Democrats because it is a big government situation. But it's not a losing issue for them. The polling's been relatively okay on this for them. So I don't think this is a, unlike the Conscious Protection Act or on the abortion issue where they've gone, off the radar or off the rails, if you will. And unlike critical race theory and some of the other stuff, the LGBT situation, this is a little different. I think in this case, I think you're going to have more Gen Zers and others believing that this is a good thing, even though they will get some pushback on it. So I don't think this is too damaging for them.
David, we have about 30 seconds left. Unlike the polling on student debt, there is an Associated Press NORC poll that says 56% of Americans favor wearing masks on planes, trains, and public transportation. 24% opposed, 20% say neither in favor or opposed. The White House says if the CDC concludes that a mandatory mask order is necessary for the public's health, then it will get the Department of Justice to appeal. Any thoughts on how this might shake out?
Well, I think the Biden administration passed the buck, if you will, over to the CDC, which is all part of the administration. But the bottom line is they're going to let the CDC decide this. Look, John, I mean, straight up, right? I mean, the CDC, what they should technically say, because what they've been saying all along is they just extended the mask mandate. So they should say, yes, of course we need to appeal this. Follow the science, follow the science. Do we really think that's going to happen? I think the train has left the station on masks. I think it's pretty much over. And I think you're going to all of a sudden have the CDC say, you know what, actually, I think we're okay with letting the mask mandate evaporate, if you will. I think that's what's going to happen because I think politics is going to rule over what they will call science.
All right, David Brody, we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
You bet.
And when we come back, as European countries respond to the war in Ukraine, one raising eyebrows over its tepid response.
Welcome back. The overwhelming global consensus undoubtedly favors Ukrainians in Russia's unprovoked war against Ukraine, but one NATO country appears to be on the sidelines.
Hungary is raising eyebrows for its refusal to go all in to help its European neighbor. Jennifer Wishon explains.
As Ukraine continues to defend itself against Russia's brutal invasion, its neighbor to the west, Hungary, is deploying a strategy with just one country in mind. This month, Christian conservative Viktor Orban easily defeated a vast political coalition at home, criticism from the European Union and pressure from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to win a third consecutive term as Prime Minister of Hungary.
This victory will also be remembered for the rest of our lives, perhaps because we had to fight the biggest, overwhelming force. The left at home, the international left all around, and in the end, even the Ukrainian president.
Before the first Russian tanks rolled, there was bad blood between the two countries over Ukraine's treatment of its Hungarian-speaking citizens. But now Hungary stands out as the only country in the region refusing to help Ukraine fight Russia. That means no military aid or even weapons shipments across its borders, despite personal pleas from Zelensky.
You have to decide for yourself who you are with.
This is not our war, so we want to and will stay out of it, said Hungary's foreign minister. Orban is widely seen as Vladimir Putin's closest ally in Europe. He sought neutrality in the war despite his country's membership in both NATO and the European Union.
And they've tried to, in some ways, thread a bit of a middle road between friendliness with Russia, as well as, of course, being members of these Western structures.
Why? Russia supplies 90% of Hungary's raw energy needs. Orban blocked the EU from imposing sanctions on Russian energy imports, considered Europe's most effective weapon for putting pressure on the Kremlin, warning they would grind Hungary's economy to a halt. I'm really sorry that cheap Russian oil is more important for Hungarian politicians than Ukrainian blood, wrote the Czech Republic's defense minister. And now, when the bill comes, Orban says he'll pay for Russian gas in rubles, honoring a request from Putin designed to boost Russia's currency after sanctions took a toll.
What does this do for Russia, that the fact that Hungary, a member of NATO, is taking a more neutral stance?
I'd say there's several countries that Russia sees as perhaps not allies, that'd be too strong a word, but potential sort of vectors for wielding influence within the EU and within NATO and the West more broadly. So Hungary, I'd say I'd put in that camp.
Under Orban, Hungary has long staked out a position of independence. While most of Europe marches in lockstep to the left, Orban has moved Hungary to the right, implementing cutting-edge pro-family policies that have transformed Hungarian culture and rattled the EU. He recently backed Katalin Novak, Minister for Families, to become Hungary's first female president. Under her leadership, abortions are down 40%, Marriages are up 83%. Divorces are at a 6-decade low. And after receiving a mandate from Hungarian voters, Orbán sent this message to his European neighbors.
Christian democratic politics, conservative civic politics, and patriotic politics have won. We are telling Europe that this is not the past. This is the future. This will be our common European future.
While he's unwilling to punch Putin where it would hurt the most, Orbán has voted in favor of most EU actions against Russia, including funds for Ukraine to buy arms. The Hungarian government is also caring for hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees, aided by the nation's Christians. And now Hungarian troops we recently observed training are welcoming a NATO battle group made up of U.S. troops and others to assemble a show of force against Russian aggression. And as the world picks sides, Viktor Orbán is making it clear he's on Hungary's side, no matter what. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Thank you, Jennifer. Coming up, remembering the extraordinary life of a woman of great faith, the First Lady of CBN. Next.
And finally tonight, Dede Robertson, the First Lady of CBN and the wife of founder Pat Robertson, has died at the age of 94.
She was a founding board member of CBN and served as a member of the boards of CBN, Regent University, and Operation Blessing. She said doing the Lord's will was a great blessing in her own life.
I have seen more than I ever dreamed I would see. I have done more than I ever dreamed I would do. And it's just been a very exciting life. And working for the Lord is an exciting thing to do. Following His leading and doing the things that He wants you to do.
In her own words, among her achievements, Dede was selected Christian Woman of the Year in 1986 and was also an accomplished writer, authoring 2 books and a monthly column for Christian Life magazine. Dede's family described her as the glue that held them together and a servant of Christ who left a mark on all she set her hand to. You can see a tribute to Dede Robertson by going to cbnnews.com. A life well lived.
Absolutely.
Thanks for watching.
Have a great night.